This podcast uses adult language.
This is Kevin.
And this is Elisabeth.
And this is Lesson 83 Podcast. Welcome back, Elisabeth. I'm glad to be recording today with you.
Yeah, you too.
So today we wanted to talk a little bit about long distance relationships, which is something you and I have experience with in the past. You and I are both currently in long distance relationships.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to kind of talk a little about them. We're going to go through what can help in a long distance relationship, talk a little bit about love languages, and some current concerns to maybe be aware of when you're wanting to enter into a long distance relationship.
I'm excited.
After all this, we got an interview with one of my friends named Sarah, who is a kink and poly-friendly therapist. Anyways, let's get started with the long-distance relationships discussion. Elisabeth, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. So my experience with long-distance relationships has been on and off since I was a young teenager. Actually, the first time that I pursued ethical non-monogamy in any form was in high school. I had a long-distance boyfriend, and I really fell for this girl at my high school, and I approached my boyfriend and I was like, what would you think if we dated other people as well, and he was like, no. But I tried. Anyway, and so I feel like long distance relationships can be great with polyamory in a lot of ways. I think that monogamy can be more tricky with long distance because, especially if you're a physical touch type of person, which we're going to cover a little bit later with love languages. So yeah, long distance can be great. Your relationship can totally thrive, but we're going to cover a little bit about some communication styles and how things like that might help.
I know for me, I probably wouldn't consider being in a long distance relationship if I wasn't polyamorous, because for me, I really need those physical aspects of a relationship whenever I can have it. And being stuck monogamously with somebody who is distant from me would be very, very difficult.
Yeah, I feel the same way, actually.
And so, we may have talked about it before, maybe not yet, but I really love that polyamory can really give me more nuanced relationships where I can appreciate people for who they are, where they are, and not to have a laundry list of needs that have to be met by this one person in my romantic life.
Yeah, I agree. I really like that. I like that polyamory is a choose your own adventure in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, any relationship is, but with polyamory, there's more flexibility about what characteristics and hobbies you have in common with your partners, because you don't have to match up in every way or change at the same rate in the same ways. I love that about polyamory.
And you had mentioned physical touch. That kind of touches on one of the things that we wanted to talk about in relation to long distance relationships, and that's love languages.
I'll just throw in there, if you don't mind. The love languages that we're talking about are the 5 love languages based on a book by Gary Chapman called The 5 Love Languages. And just to run down them real briefly, they are basically ways that people show and receive the feeling and actions of love from their partners. And so words of affirmation, physical touch, receiving gifts, and I would argue giving gifts, quality time, and acts of service. Those are the 5 love languages. So what do you think about those, Kevin?
I really felt connected to it when I first learned about it. And a lot of things kind of clicked into place when I had heard about it. I was like, this is why people have different expectations in their relationships, because they want and need different things, and they express their love by giving different things.
Yeah.
So we were going to kind of run through just briefly, a little bit about what each of them are before returning back to the main topic at hand. So let's start with the words of affirmation. I think that's a pretty common one, especially for giving love languages for a lot of people, is to want to express that through kind words.
Absolutely. I tend to be one of those people who makes the incorrect assumption that my partner doesn't need reassurance that I love them. And so then my partners are like, they're words of affirmation people, and they're like, wait a minute, does she even love me? And I'm just like, well, surely they know that I love them, so I don't need to remind them. But that's an example of different love languages because mine are not words of affirmation as much. So, like one particular partner I'm thinking of, definitely. So I have to remember, like, oh, the way that person receives love is through words of affirmation. And I need to remind him that I love him, even though he knows, and that I'm proud of him and that I like him and blah, 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 all those things. So yeah, there's a difference right there. But what about you with words of affirmation?
I enjoy giving and receiving words of affirmation, but at times, words of affirmation, especially if I'm in a depressive episode or if I'm not feeling well, then words of affirmation aren't as useful. And
Yeah.
so, even for some people, what those needs are to understand love and to feel loved can change. The next one on the list is physical touch, which can express anything from a hug to sexual intimacy. It's a whole wide range of different,
Holding hands,
yeah, holding hands.
snuggling on the couch while you watch TV. That's all physical touch. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's definitely a big one for me, which is I think we touched on earlier why I probably wouldn't be monogamous in a long distance relationship. I wouldn't be monogamous at all. I don't think. Yeah, definitely not long distance because I do love physical touch. It's definitely a big love language for me. And I like snuggling. I don't even need all of my relationships to have a sexual element necessarily, but like I do want to be able to feel comfortable enough to touch their skin in some way. So, and I'm intimate with my friends in that way too. Like I hug and snuggle a lot of my friends. I tell them I love them, love languages can transcend, different types of relationships. But anyway, so yeah, physical touch, that's a big one. And I'm glad we're bringing it up today with long distance relationships because that's like the one big thing that can be missing
yeah.
from long distance. You can do almost everything else, I would say, but physical touch is the tricky one. So how do you feel about physical touch? I bet you're a big physical touch person too.
I am. And we alluded to this earlier as well for me that physical touch is a big reason why I may not be able to have solely long distance relationships by choice.
What are ways, I mean, we're going to get back to everything in a second, I think, but what are ways that you have found to work around that limitation in long distance relationships, do you think? Like, is there anything that kind of not takes the place of, but like, I find that having like clothing items that smell like my partner's is a nice like replacement sometimes if they're not around for physical touch, even though it's like an
Mhm.
olfactory thing actually, but you know what I mean? Like something physical that I can touch that reminds
Yeah.
me of them. So maybe that can help with long distance, that kind of thing.
Yeah, for me, it's hard to tell because my only functional long-term relationship has been with somebody who I am deeply committed to and committed to on an emotional and intellectual level. And, if I had my way of the world, then her and I would not be separated. But that's not the world we live in right now. And so I'd much rather have her as a long distance partner. I I would find it hard or difficult to imagine myself outside of this sort of scenario really being accepting or being okay with having a long distance relationship.
Yeah, I understand. But some people are just worth that extra effort, I feel
Mhm.
like, because even if you don't get to see them all the time, it's nice to know that they care about you even from afar. And anyway, maybe we should get to the next love language. What's the next one? Receiving gifts?
Yeah. So gifts, a lot of people complain about materialism or not wanting to commodify their relationships, but gifts don't have to be something purchased. They can be something made. They can be something created in the abstract. It could be a voice recording or a voicemail. A gift can be a lot of different things. But there's nothing wrong with appreciating and enjoying giving or receiving gifts as long as you're not demanding it of people who are financially unable to contribute what you want or are demanding of them.
I find that with this one, there's a lot of crossover with the other love languages for example,
Hmm.
acts of service and physical touch, because those are gifts to me. Like the gifts of someone's
Yeah.
time, the gifts of their energy, the gifts of, physical intimacy in whatever way, like those are gifts to me. So I guess gifts might be kind of a big one for me because I see a lot of the love languages as gifts. And I also, as like a kinkster, a lot of gifts for me involve like service or physically intense sensation that I delight in.
Hmm.
So gifts can be a lot of different things, in my opinion.
The next one is acts of service.
Um,
And what do you have to say about acts of
uh,
service?
I I think that's probably a big one for me too. I should probably just take the test. So acts of service to me could be uh setting up a date night, like, and then that becomes quality time. So again, crossover. Acts of service could be, hey, I picked up this item for you on the way to your
Hmm.
house, so that you wouldn't have to make that extra trip. That's an act of service. Of course, in the kink sense, there are many ways to serve and be served, in a consensual way. So I employ a lot of that as well. I find that service and nurturing are kind of two sides of the
Hmm.
same coin. A lot of like sweet toppity top domly doms are nurtury types, even mean ones. And on the other end of that, the service can look very similar. So I think that acts of service is very flexible and can come in many different forms.
And, to maybe put a finer point on it, acts of service can also be,
Yeah, I went kind of abstract.
well, yeah. So to put a finer point on it, it could be something like
Hanging up a painting for you.
hanging up a painting, doing the dishes. There are all sorts of things that you can do to help out your partner. Take someone to a medical appointment that they're concerned about. Just being there present. That could be an act of service in and of itself.
Definitely. Or even giving them a massage, which
Yeah.
combines the elements of physical touch and, I would say, gifts, because massage is like a very selfless act in many ways. Like,
Mhm.
that's how I feel. So,
The last one is quality time.
my favorite one.
Oh yeah. So
Yeah.
so what do you have to say about quality time?
I'm very aggressively protective of my time. I try to do a bit of time blocking, and like uh I silence my phone when I'm not focused on answering all my texts or whatever. So I try, if I'm spending time with someone, I try to really focus on that. And whatever that means for the two of us, or the three of us or whatever. So quality time is probably the biggest one for me, because if I'm not spending time communicating with you in some way and communing with you in some way, then I find it hard to maintain being grounded in the relationship.
Mhm.
So quality time might actually be my biggest one. Maybe physical touch is really close.
I think as we've gone down the list, every single one has been your biggest one.
Well, I like them all. You're right. You're so right. I was like, this is my favorite. Oh, I forgot about this one. This one's actually my favorite. Yeah. No, you're right.
Quality time's very important. Something to put a polyam spin on this is that for a lot of people in ethical non-monogamy, they'll see, oh, well, I'm going to go spend just 2 hours with X partner, and Y partner is really mad. And Y partner is the nesting partner who spends 99.9% of their time doing chores, doing the mundane parts of life, and not spending quality time where you're doing something that's rewarding for both of you, or at the very least, one of you.
Yeah, at the very least one. Yeah, hopefully at least one. Definitely. Yeah, I agree. So,
I think we'll probably come back to love languages at some point in the future and put a little bit of more examples out there for you and talk a little bit more in detail. But it felt important in this discussion because love languages can be very different for long distance relationships.
absolutely. I find that you have to be more explicit with your verbal affirmations with long distance. I have to be really clear and like, if you're trying to be coy or like confusing in some way with your texts or messages or emails or something, then that's just going to cause confusion in the relationship. And so
Yeah.
they're not going to get immediately like your body posture and your tone and all of that, right? The context. So they're going to be more likely to be defensive. You're going to be more likely to be defensive and confused. So that's a tricky part, I think, for long distance stuff and like words of affirmation specifically. You got to be real specific, or at least that's how I feel. Um, and physical touch is the tricky one, I think. So let's talk about visiting. You've experienced that a little more than me in this scenario.
Hmm. Well, we wanted to talk just generally about how to maintain a healthy long distance relationship, and visitations, whenever possible or practicable, are can be very important, especially to people like me who want to see their partner in person. It For me, it very much feels different to see my partner in person versus seeing them on a screen. I don't think that would come to a surprise to anybody. So scheduling those out, having them be something that you can look forward to, um, being realistic and understanding where people are and aren't able to participate with you in that sort of way in the relationship. Uh, Understand and make sure that you're both compatible with how often are you able to see each other, and is that going to be enough?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Because some people are happy with once a month, and some people are happy with like twice a year, and some people are happy with like twice a week. So,
Or never.
or never. Yeah.
In addition to that, and kind of similar, is scheduling your time, making sure that you have date night set up, whether that be normally occurring or irregularly occurring at some sort of specific interval. Both of those are good things to have, and for me, make me feel a lot more comfortable in my long distance relationships.
I totally agree. I'm a big fan of the check-in and the date night.
Hmm.
I think that quality time is high up there for me because I fiercely guard those times, those hours when I get to spend with my partners, one-on-one. And that's what I need. So, yeah, it's harder, you know, long distance, but you can definitely have video chat times. And some people watch movies together long distance, or listen to music together long distance, or play
Hmm.
Dungeons and Dragons long distance, or
Like me and my partner.
you and your partner. Exactly. So yeah, there are lots of ways to like spend time together on quote unquote date nights for even long distance, but there is that physical touch missing.
Yeah. And lastly, the last main thing we wanted to make sure to highlight was that make sure that your expectations on technological communication are the same. So, similar to how having the same expectations around how often you visit, having how often and what the protocol is to respond to messages. Yeah, I think you said that you, similar to me, have something with your partners where you say, like, text messages are responded to at my earliest convenience, like when I'm able to. And I very much tell people that sometimes I get feedback like, "Oh, I'm sorry I didn't text you back." It's like, if I needed you, I would have sent you a string of text messages or called you or done something else.
Yeah. I use a program called Audio Guru. It's just an app for adjusting the volume of your various notifications on your phone. And it's actually been a lifesaver for me in separating out my time and my date nights and my work life, because I can silence exactly the notifications that I want to be silenced, and I can still have my ringer on. And so if there's an emergency, someone will call me. And that makes me feel like I can focus on the person in front of me or the task at hand. And really, this simple like adjustment to my phone notifications has made a big positive difference in my relationships.
Counselors hate her for this one trick.
Audio Guru.
All right. So we wanted to talk a little bit very quickly about the concerns that people might have entering into a long distance relationship. The first one you had thought of was catfishing, and I hadn't even thought about that.
The reason I thought about catfishing and people not being genuine about who they are on the internet or in a long distance relationship is because I'm a pro dom, of 10 plus years. And so I'm familiar with some of the people who, use dynamics, especially long distance dynamics, for money in some fashion, and sometimes it's consensual, but a lot of the times it's not. So,
Mhm.
if you're looking for a romantic dynamic and this person lies about who they are, in some way, then that can be damaging in several different fashions, emotionally and maybe even financially. So, yeah, catfishing, I mean, it's not a big concern, honestly, like for as much as like other things might be, but I thought it was worth bringing up.
Yeah. The person may not be who they say they are. The person may not be as non-monogamous as they claim to be. And having a physical distance between you and your partner can make that easier for them to conceal.
Very true. Even without the element of catfishing, they could totally, it's easier with distance to lie about who you are and what you're involved in, the context. So you could have a whole secret family in Oklahoma and we wouldn't even know necessarily. So people do sometimes lie. And the thing I find liberating about polyamory is that it really takes the desire for me to be sneaky in any way. Like, not that that's my natural state, but like, I like that I can be open and honest about who I'm seeing and what my time constraints are in a polyamorous dynamic.
Well, that was a great discussion. We'll probably come back to many of these topics again in the future. On the next segment, I'm going to be talking with my friend Sarah, the kink and poly-friendly counselor, about concerns and things that are useful information for you.
Yeah, she's awesome.
All right. Welcome back to the Less Than 83 podcast. Back with our special guest, Sarah. Do you want to reintroduce yourself to people that might not have caught the last episode?
Okay. Sarah Charbonneau, and I am in private practice. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and primarily work with polykinky people.
Awesome. So last time we talked a little bit about how to utilize therapy, when to seek out a therapist, what's it like to be out, and violations of trust, and a few other miscellaneous topics. So if you want to hear about those, check out the last episode. They'll be there. But for this one, we definitely want to start out by talking about, like, how do you find a poly-friendly therapist? Because not all therapists are poly-friendly.
Yeah, and a lot don't seem to very openly advertise as such, but it doesn't mean that people aren't open to or have experience or knowledge of working with poly people. It just seems like they don't think to like put it, like broadcast it or put it on their directory of information or, where you can find people. But I have told a lot of people, and I'm on a couple different things, like National Coalition for Sexual Freedom is a great source, and they have a huge directory of professionals that are poly knowledgeable, kink knowledgeable. So I usually...
Yeah, and that spans like therapists, psychologists, all the way up to like lawyers or doctors.
Yeah, definitely, which is it's just such an awesome resource because a lot of people don't feel so open to just going to anyone because you're not sure if you're going to be judged or if you're going to be influenced in some way that doesn't feel authentic to why you're coming in. So that's a place I tend to tell people to go a lot. But there's also a couple other good poly-friendly resource directories that I found for therapists online that I tend to point people to. Sometimes on Psychology Today, you can search poly as a keyword and some people come up, but it's often very few.
Gotcha. And to kind of expand on why people might want a poly-friendly therapist, I know experiences I've heard, people going to the therapist and spending the first 8 or 9 sessions explaining ethical non-monogamy and why it's okay or why it's a good choice for them.
Yep.
Instead of focusing on other things that they want to focus on in therapy, they're having to educate their therapists. Do you want to expand on that at all? Or
Sure. Yeah, that is a common complaint and kind of my worst nightmare. I joke with clients that I make it my lot in life to make sure I'm at least keeping up, if not one step ahead, and so that they can spend their time using it for what they really need to be there for. The last thing they need to be doing is using their time that they're paying me for to educate me on things that they just shouldn't have to do that. It's exhausting. So just terminology, right? And different relationship structures and dynamics, these things are really important for therapists to know if they're going to work with poly people. Word of mouth, I think, it depends on obviously where people live, but
Yeah.
poly communities are usually most, I guess, well, there's some poly people that they're not connected to other poly people in a community, but oftentimes there are connections. And I think that's how a lot of people end up hearing about me, is just through word of mouth within the community.
This is your friendly reminder to check out your local community. And if it's full of people who make you feel uncomfortable, make your own.
Yeah.
Make your own
That's
band of
good advice.
weirdos. That's what I did. And look where I am now. Well, so I think that's all great. So we also wanted to try to talk a little bit about mental health, or how relationships might have a positive benefit to your mental health. So what do you want to say on that?
Oh gosh, there's so much. Well, I mean, first and foremost, that connection is everything, right? I mean, if we really strip down most things about humanity, I mean, it's about connection. So the more connected we are to our people, the better we usually feel. So when we don't have good connection, or we feel we're very isolated, it often is negative. It has a negative impact on our mental health. So that in general, I think, everyone needs to feel like they belong or are loved and seen and deserving.
Mm-hmm.
And I think relationships are a really good source of helping us feel that way. So I think that's probably, the biggest thing that I think is good for our mental health, to feel connected to other people and have meaningful relationships, whether it be intimate, romantic, sexual.
Friends are a type of relationship. Family are a type of relationship. Relationship comes in all stripes, but especially romantic relationships, I know for me, are highly valuable. So I've always considered, humans to be a very social creature. And so I've always found a lot of benefit to my social circles. One of the commonly heard pieces of advice that I hear talked about is, make sure you're in a good place before you start relationships. Do you have specific thoughts or feelings about that?
What does good place mean?
Yeah.
That's why I want to poke at that and be like, what does that exactly mean? Because are we in a good place with our job? Are we in a good place with ourselves? Are we in a good place, where we live? Of course, that's what I want to do, is dissect, what does good place mean?
Yeah.
Now, is it true that, if we're really in bad shape, right? We're maybe having trauma responses to things, or if we're really in a dark place, we're not stable with our moods or have good coping skills, then sure, that might not be a good place, right? It's such a hard question to answer, I generally think that I think that we need to have at least a decent sense of self-worth or feeling of worthiness in order to, I think, have the best shot at good intimate relationships and romantic relationships. Because I see a lot of people end up making choices or sacrifices in a way that does not reinforce good self-worth in relationships, by not communicating what they need or want or how they really feel, because they don't feel like they can or they should, or, there's a lot of stuff that can come up.
Are you a fan of Dan Savage at all? The advice columnist?
Mostly.
I'm probably in a similar boat to you, that it's not everything he says I can agree with, but he's got a turn of phrase of being in good working order.
Yes.
Being able to do the basics for yourself, being able to care for yourself and advocate for yourself, I feel is the key aspects that you really need to be able to make sure you can do. But I think you had a few good add-ons to that list I'll probably be adding when talking about this in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that phrase too, and I do agree with it. Because, I've known people to where if they have a hard time even just being by themselves or with themselves, and they are always seeking to be with someone else in order to not have to be with themselves, that's, other people, external things can't be everything, Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There needs to be a certain amount of self-actualization.
Right.
Things where you appreciate your own life.
Right. Or enjoy your own company a little bit.
Yeah. So what other kind of ways do our relationships help provide good mental health support? Or do you feel like you want to talk more about some of the negative effects of relationships can have when they're not going as well as they should?
We could do both, but I have a couple
Okay.
more things I could say about positive, like, benefits, in how it can help our mental health. Is I think partners often help us like mirror things back to us sometimes. I know I've been challenged by partners in really positive ways, even though it was a real bitch simultaneously, but like it was something I needed to
Mm-hmm.
see or hear or be pushed on,
Mm-hmm.
that was actually good for me, or healthy for me
Yeah.
and helped me improve myself in some way. So I think sometimes our partners can help mirror things back to us that we don't always see. We can get into our own grooves and habits real quick, and
One of the things that I've always said I've appreciated about Polly is it really helped provide a foil to myself. And it's very easy to dismiss one partner
oh yeah,
telling you that you should change something in your life when you got 2 or 3 people saying, no, this is a problem, you should fix it. You're like,
right.
oh, it's not that just that one
Yeah,
person, it's
yeah.
me.
Common denominator, right? You're like, oh, if you're hearing the same thing from multiple sources, chances are you need to look at that, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that that's really true, and we don't see that within ourselves when we're just in our own hanging out with ourselves, like, but other people can be
Mhm.
really good at putting the mirror up and helping us look at ourselves differently, which is good. We all need that.
I mean, like the flip side of that is sometimes people can challenge you in ways that are unhealthy or not reflective of reality and warp your sense of reality. That could be definitely a negative.
Yeah, detrimental to mental health would definitely be those. I mean, the most obvious extreme is like more toxic relationships or communication issues where we're told that we're crazy for thinking the way we do or feeling the way we feel or having a need, having a request. And also stigma, when it comes to mental health, if someone's struggling, if they're having depression or anxiety, and you have a partner who says kind of like, what's the big deal? Right? Like, just get over it. It's not that big of a deal. Why are you so upset? That invalidation
Yeah.
that can happen, even with the best intentions, which I think most invalidation can be well intended, when we're trying to fix somebody else's feelings or problems and trying to help problem solve when really our partner, we just want to be heard. We want to be maybe comforted, but we're receiving invalidation. That can be really painful, and it can cause more sadness, more feeling of disconnection or isolation, even if our partner's right next to us,
Yeah.
you know?
And it can cause you to question whether the feelings you're having, like you were saying, invalidating, but it can make you feel like maybe those emotions are coming from nowhere but yourself instead of being a real response to a stimulus, which, if your partner doesn't truly understand where you're coming from might be part of the problem.
Right. Yeah. And feeling judged, I think, is another, some people, oh, this has come up a lot actually,
Mm-hmm.
where there might be some acceptance or, embracing of maybe a partner or a few partners like take medication, for instance, which is, valid. Tons of people take medication, but
Yep.
say you're having a particularly like a slump of a day, like maybe you're having more sadness or feeling more withdrawn, and your partner says to you, like, well, did you take your medication today? That can be a shitty thing,
Yeah.
to hear. It gets double-edged, right? Like it can be a helpful prompt, but it can also feel like I've had people tell me that they feel very misunderstood or like it's oversimplified, or that like medicine is the make or break of this whole person,
Mm-hmm.
that like what I'm not just entitled to just have emotions, like it has to be about my
Yeah.
medicine, or because I'm struggling with it, it must be that I'm not taking my medicine, and then it causes trust
Yeah.
issues. So I've seen a lot of that too, where it's just feeling judged or having emotional feelings or experiences be oversimplified.
Yeah. I feel very lucky in a strange way that I was born with a mood disorder because it has allowed me to realize that a lot of my and other people's responses to issues are very colored by our mood. I can go through the same experience one day or another, and feel them very differently
Mhm.
and experience them very differently depending on the mood I'm in. And it
Yep,
is just astounding to
absolutely.
me that other people don't ever get that sort of clear, oh, hey, I'm having a manic day, I'm having a depressive day. Oh, that's the difference between these two
Mhm.
experiences. Like when I look back on it a few days later, it mind-boggling to me that it's a more unique
Mhm.
circumstance than the general uh, population probably experiences.
Yeah, and not necessarily a bad thing, right? It's, I do
Yeah,
think there's, yeah, I just, unfortunately, when it comes to mental health or mental health issues, there's still so much stigma, that I wish would be lifted because the bottom line is we're all like the weather. That's the way it was the analogy I use. I'm like, we're all like the weather. It's not clear skies all the time. I don't care who you are. You know, we have days and times in which it
yeah.
is it is foggy and cloudy up there, or it's dreary and we don't see any rays of sun at all.
I feel like I want to take that analogy too far and be like, well, some people are Seattle and some people are Arizona.
True, true, but even Arizona has monsoons.
Exactly.
Yep.
And from what I heard from my friends who live in Seattle, about 2 weeks out of the year, they get sunshine. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah, they're almost like polar opposites, right? Arizona and Seattle.
So anything else that you feel like you'd like to add in before we end this segment today? Any big takeaways you feel like people should really take away from uh, that you can really provide?
Yeah, it's my soapbox I always go on when we're talking about these
Here we
things,
go.
especially
Go for
well,
it.
and it's not mine, it's shared with people who are very well known, like Brene Brown. Um, but when we're talking about relationships and connection, right, and intimacy, we have to be willing to be vulnerable, right? So like if we have our emotions, we're struggling with our emotions. If our weather is not good, it's like we have to be willing to let it be known. So many of us, I think, tend to kind of retract within ourselves and not want to be seen or not want to let other people know how we're doing. But we have to in order to have better relationships, have the ability to get support and have better connections with people around us. We have to be willing to be vulnerable and say, I'm not okay right now. Like, I need some help, or can I get a hug, or I need some reassurance, you know?
Asking can be a big deal and can be very helpful to your partners to understand what you need.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for taking time to talk with us today.
Yeah, thanks. You too.
You can find us on Twitter, through email, or on Reddit. To submit your questions or to recommend topics, please reach out to our contact info in the show notes.
This episode was edited by Jordan Davis. Music is by Anti Lude, and logo designed by Carmen Bolding.